Welcome to Beyond Longevity, the podcast that explores not just how we age, but how we can build a longer, healthier future for ourselves.
My guest today on Beyond Longevity is Dr. Ilia Stambler, a historian of longevity, author of multiple books, papers and articles, and a fierce advocate for healthy lifespan research. Dr. Ilia has spent decades helping to push longevity from the margins towards becoming a serious policy priority. He's chairman of the International Longevity Alliance and serves as Chief Science Officer and chairman of the Vetek Association, a movement for longevity and quality of life. Dr. Ilia is also one of the few people in the space with a deep knowledge of the history of longevity, where humanity's desire for longer life comes from, how those ideas evolved over time, and what they can still teach us today. This is a conversation about how longevity moves theory into action, how governments begin to enact longevity policies, how advocacy can influence funding and priorities, and what it really takes to build momentum behind a field like this. Hello, Dr. Ilia. It's such a pleasure that you found the time to join us on Beyond Longevity. Amongst being an author and educator and researcher and all the other things you do, you're a Chief Scientist Officer and Chairman of Vetek Association. It's a movement for longevity and quality of life. Do tell us a little bit more about yourself and the association.
Well, I'm into longevity. I've been since I was 6 years old. Do I tell the whole story? Yes, I'm a researcher. I have over 80 academic papers, book chapters, and peer-reviewed articles, 2 books. It's one, my opus magnum opus, History of Life Extensionism in the 20th Century. It includes the history of the field in the Western world. This one, the small opus, Longevity Promotion, Multidisciplinary Perspectives, where I analyze the longevity from various angles: history, philosophy, science, policy. And apart of that, I'm also an advocate. I'm an activist. I run non-profit associations. The Vetek Society, the Movement for Longevity and Quality of Life, is my major Israeli affiliation. I am also involved in all kinds of other organizations. I'm a chairman of International Longevity Alliance, which is umbrella non-profit for longevity organizations, which now includes 76 non-profit associations from 66 countries. And that's actually my main occupation. I find time to write my papers, but my main occupation is advocacy, activism, because I think that's the backbone. It's the foundation also for others to thrive. I'm not interested to promote, I'll tell you from the start, I'm not interested to promote my research or my projects. I'm interested to help build the longevity ecosystem.
You just mentioned you being connected to 76 organizations through the International Longevity Alliance. What does the network actually do in practice? I guess you share ideas. What else do you do?
Right. So we meet, we network, we encourage each other. Just knowing that you are part of a network of 76 organizations already very encouraging. For example, if we go to some events, last year ILA co-organized about 12 international conferences. This year we already are organizing at least 13. The year just started. So it's very encouraging if you are an activist, a local activist, and you say you're part of ILA. It also gives you more weight, and it gives the ILA more weight. So that's the force of the synergy of all the organizations. Some of our main achievements were a few years back, before the COVID. We actually helped to introduce aging as the part of the International Classification of Diseases. We were the first to petition for including aging as a medical condition. Now it has 2 ICD codes: age-associated decline in intrinsic capacity and aging-related condition. So thanks to our advocacy, not only ours, but also ours, we were also quite instrumental to include aging as a part of the WHO World Program back in 2017. So the force of ILA is, the power of ILA is really campaigning. We have been organizing the Longevity Day and Month campaign since 2013, now for 13 years. Every year in October, around October 1 or throughout October, we organize events. In our good years, we had events in dozens of countries, up to 50 countries. So in all those events, we raise public awareness, interest. So once again, it's always good to show yourself as a part of the network, part of the movement. It gives the movement strength and gives individual strength. So that's what ILA usually does. Of course, we could do better, with our background and potential. We could really be major decision makers, but unfortunately, the longevity is still not so much in everybody's mind, not on everybody's agenda. But we try our best to put it there, to put it on the agenda.
When you say it's not generally understood really what longevity is, what do you think the public most badly misunderstands about longevity science today? And as a secondary question, what do you think governments don't understand about it?
I think the main thing they don't understand or don't really understand sufficiently is the major importance of this issue. And there are various psychological reasons for that. We can enter into the details, what parts of science they don't understand, what parts of education they don't have. But the main thing is just to set up health and longevity as a priority. It is not set up as a priority. When I started in the field, not to say at the age of 6, but let's say in about 25 years ago, when I started to actively promote the subject online, people didn't even think about it. People in the West didn't even, it wasn't even an issue. Health longevity, health span extension, there weren't any words like this. You could hear intervention to aging, not there. And thanks to also our advocacy, drilling and drilling and drilling into people's health, so it's more of an issue now. We have discussed in the press, among decision makers. It took 25 years to people to begin to realize how urgent this is. And still it's not realized by all. Still people, they prefer to block it out of their mind. My explanation is that the psychological care management issue. People just don't think that they want to age, so they prefer not to think about it. So, out of sight, out of mind. If you don't see the problem, it's not there. So we don't have to address it. Some people believe that they cannot do anything about it, cannot improve their aging. Some people believe it will never reach them, that they will never get old. So for all kinds of psychological reasons, people prefer not to deal with aging and health longevity. Well, when they do realize it's an issue, then they start getting involved in the longevity movement. And our task is to get as many people involved as possible. And we're getting there, but we are far from being there.
When you speak to governments or public bodies, what language works best with them? Do you use the words of longevity or healthy aging or prevention, resilience, quality of life? What's the trigger word for them?
Longevity works nice. The prevention of age-related disease is nice. But the funny thing, I've been in this advocacy for 25 years. Yes, I talked with governments. In 2012, we wrote our first petition to all the members of Knesset, of the Israeli parliament, and requested that aging is recognized as a treatable condition, that we should improve health and longevity for our people, and we should make a advisory committee on that at the Knesset. It's still not established. After 14 years, still not established. But when you talk with them, they all agree with you. There was the single person I talked with among decision makers and the regular people, the regular public, that didn't agree with me. Yes, it's very important to prevent age-related disease. But then you finish the talk and you walk your separate ways, and they return to their agendas, because that's still not urgent for them. They still block it out of their minds. They still have their more urgent agendas, like how they're going to be elected, where they get the next funding. So yes, they agree with me, with us, with the longevity movement. They don't do much about it. So that's the big problem. They get convinced. Believe me, when you talk, they understand, they get convinced. Yes, very important. And then they forget about it. So the actual question is not how to convince them, but how to make them act on the conviction. That's a question I don't really have an answer. I guess once again, the answer is to have more people involved. When they see that there's really a constituency here, that people really want to see this happen, then they will start to move in the right direction. Otherwise, they go anywhere where they see the constituency, where they see the actual public interest, like that, wars and gas prices and things like that.
But do you think it's a financial issue? They don't want to fund it? Or do you think it's more a question of it's not as pressing or as important to actually do something about it?
Basically, they don't think it's urgent. We've been saying the same thing for 25 years. And they don't think it's urgent. Many people died of old age diseases in the time. They still don't think it's urgent. In our country, in Israel, 50,000 people dying from age-related diseases, much more than all the wars, all the accidents combined during the whole history of the country. They don't think it's urgent. Also, the financial issue is important. What we advocate is we advocate investing in research. So that requires long-term vision. That requires some long-term thinking. and they want to see the result right now before the next election term. In 4 years, do you give me the pill for health longevity? Maybe. No, they just want the pill. They don't even want to pay any money for the pill. They ask me, what should I do? What should I do? I tell me, you know what you have to do. You have to eat healthy and engage in exercise. But then I try to explain that you have to also fund aging research, invest in aging research. That's something that's more difficult to understand. You try to give examples, like think about the defense systems. First, you invest in research and development, then you have all those wonderful systems that protect us. When it comes to aging, they don't get this reasoning. Basically, the problem is that we want the money for research now, and they promise the results in, I don't know, in 10 years and 15 years. And that's a gap to cross. That's a major issue, yes.
Education in general is a big part of your advocacy. Do you speak to universities that teach medical students about the importance of teaching about longevity? And do you find that they're receptive to it or not really?
Yes. I started to be active advocate about 25 years ago, in the beginning of this century and of the last century. There's no comparison. The level of awareness now versus what was 25 years ago, it's a different level. People do get it, to begin to get it. We organize conferences every year in Israel and around the world. As I said, ILA organizes 12 international conferences. Out of them, our Vetek association, the Israeli association, co-organizes about 6 or 7. So in all those conferences, we have a great contingency of researchers, of physicians, of students. They all get it. They all become interested. And we continue to expand our education. Here in Israel, we're also developing a course. So our main agenda is to get more people involved through education. There's no other way. We have to educate people about the importance, about the ways things can be changed. That's never enough. Build it up, but it's never enough. We need to get everybody.
Going back a little bit to governments and their policy toward the idea of longevity, are there any countries, governments worldwide that you're aware of that are very proactive in the field of longevity and they've sort of adopted a more proactive mindset with regards to longevity?
Some people are surprised, but still the most proactive country is the United States. People, I tell to Americans, you're still the best, you're still number one. They don't believe me, but you still invest in aging research more than the whole world combined through the National Institute on Aging, the National Institute on Health. You still fund most of it. Most of the ideas come from the United States, especially after World War II. If you read my book, you'll see that before the World War, the research was more evenly distributed. In France, Germany, Russia, after the war, it was mainly concentrated in the United States. There was some research in the UK, elsewhere, but the main concentration was in the United States in terms of ideas. Molecular biological approach, the reductionist approaches all comes from the United States. They're still the main funder. They're still most interested in the field. On the population level, people taking supplements. On the governmental level, but still, with all that involvement, it's not enough. We still don't have a cure for aging from the United States. Actually, the life expectancy in the United States and health expectancy is declining. So it's one of the worst situations in the developed world. With all that research, it doesn't help to stall the decline in life expectancy. So it's not enough. But if you ask what's the most active country, it's the United States.
I guess the gap between the ones that do and the ones that don't sort of is much wider in the US than anywhere else. You have people who are really looking after themselves and want to live longer and healthier and better. And I guess you have, the other half who just, lives much worse than, let's say Europe or whatever. So I guess the gap is wider. Is that your impression too? Or why do you think?
Definitely, that's a part of the explanation for the declining life expectancy. But a part of the explanation why it is so well funded, relatively well funded in the United States, is also thanks to advocacy. The United States has a strong culture of advocacy, of philanthropy. So in the 70s, there was a person, Robert Butler, not many people remember, but he actually went to the government and said it's an important topic and please deal with it, raised a public movement. And in the end, in 1974, there was established this National Institute on Aging, the first in the world under Richard Nixon. Also, many people remember other bad things about Richard Nixon, but he was the guy who started the war on cancer, and he was the guy who started the National Institute on Aging. He was receptive to such ideas. So thanks to advocacy, we have this basis for the research finding that states it still continues. It's still the largest funder for aging research in the world with a budget of a few $billion a year. And that was thanks to an advocate, a single person who was able to raise the advocacy movement. And in America, we see it all the time. You see it with the AIDS movement, for AIDS research and cancer research, that it's a very strong culture of advocacy. And I hope others can learn from that.
Let's speak a bit about your career path. You decided that longevity advocacy rather than the science alone was the way to go. Why? Why do you think that would have a bigger impact?
Right. So if you calculate the main bang for the buck, that's obviously the way to go. First of all, even my PhD dissertation, I did my PhD on the history of longevity research, and that is the best bang for the buck. The history doesn't cost anybody any money. You don't have to invest in the reagents and the lab, just to sit down and with your computer and the library and write in a nice history. So many people become convinced. So yeah, was probably about tens of thousands of people. So it's a good bang for the buck in terms of education. In terms of advocacy, it's even more so. Our conferences and our outreach, it costs really pennies, and the outcome can be millions. So I'm very proud to say that thanks to our advocacy, we're able to get millions for aging research. Just last year in 1925, we were able to establish 3 grant support programs for aging research from the Ministry of Science, Ministry of Health, and the British Council in Israel for UK-Israel cooperation. On aging research, very proud to say that it was mainly thanks to our advocacy. We just went there and convinced that it's important. I also helped to write those sponsor proposals. So out of practically zero investment in our association, we have a very poor association. We don't have enough funding for anything. With the close to zero investment in our association, we got millions for the aging field. So I think that's in terms of the bang for the buck, that's probably the best. That's I also encouraging other people to get involved in aging research advocacy. Of course, we need the actual scientists the actual research. I'm also actual research. I have the Hirsch index of 20. So I do some things in research, but still, compared to what I can achieve, but through my specific research versus what I can achieve as a community builder, as an ecosystem builder, my effort is much better spent on building the community and the ecosystem and the public support. And then I hope more and more people will become involved in this and support advocacy as well.
Can you give us some other examples of what advocacy has genuinely changed already?
Okay, so first of all, in Israel, pretty much all the governmental funding for aging research was thanks to our advocacy. In 2014, we did an international conference. I would say it was probably one of the first, if not the first, conference with longevity in the title. Before that, there were gerontological conference, aging conference. We said that the pathways to health and longevity. So now we take it for granted, like health longevity, but in 2014, health longevity was kind of a neologism and a new word. Did the first conference, and then it convinced the government to give the first grant support program for aging research in 2014. That's 12 years ago. And since then, calculated about $20 million more that were achieved for aging research just in Israel. So that's our work, and I'm very proud of it. And many studies were actually started from this funding. That's just our small example of Israel. Of course, in the United States, as I said, Robert Butler is a paramount of advocacy. Thanks to him, we have billions in aging research. But also in our work with International Longevity Alliance, I already mentioned our campaign for including aging into the WHO Work Program in 2017. There were various contributors, also International Federation of Aging, International Society on Aging Disease, but ILA was also very active, recruited probably hundreds of researchers, hundreds of organizations to actually petition the WHO, and it was included. They didn't think aging was an important topic for global health, and we convinced them through advocacy that yes, it's important, so they included it into the WHO Work Program. The inclusion of aging is a part of the ICD-11, also thanks to not only us, but also us. In 2012, as I mentioned, I wrote this petition to all the members of Knesset asking to recognize aging as a medical condition. I think it was the first governmental level outreach for this issue. After that, the movement grew and grew and grew. The ILA petitioned the WHO, and all the other organizations joined in. And now it's part of the International Classification of Diseases. We still don't use it, but that's a different issue that I'd be happy to discuss why we don't use it. But at least thanks to advocacy, we're able to change public policy at the WHO level twice. with the work program, with the ICD. In Israel, we established a national program for health, longevity, research, development, and education as a part of the Israel National Master Plan on Aging. So there are all kinds of things that you can do through advocacy. Still, people don't realize the importance of advocacy. I still have to explain to people what is it that I do. And they ask me, well, what's your project, what's your lab, and what molecule are you developing? People still think in terms of separate projects. And I can understand them. You do your own project, you try to get funding for it, you get research and return investment for it, and try to explain to them that we are trying to work at many such projects will emerge. If we establish a grant support program or regulation or policy, that the project like yours will thrive like mushrooms after the rain. But that's an approach that not many people take. We prefer to work in the specific areas.
Do you think that's because the field of longevity is still very siloed? Everybody works in their own little corners instead of coming all together?
Yeah, absolutely. And even the very topic of longevity is already overcoming the silo thinking. Most of the medical research is still thinks in terms of individual diseases, individual symptoms. The very idea of neuroscience that aging is the main risk factor or the main cause of all age-related disease, all chronic diseases, also the main risk for infectious disease. It's already a huge step forward against the silos. Most of the medical research is not even there. And even if you are already in the longevity research, if you recognize that aging is the main risk factor, it's kind of unifying framework, you have to be holistic. You have to think for the long term. You have to look for long-term effects. But still, many people don't do this. Still, many people are reductionists. They prefer to work on single molecules, on single mechanisms, cell types. So that's how it goes. And there are not many true holists, but people who will try to synergize. Let me be honest, there are problems with the synergies too. When you are holist, it's not so perfect. You try to lose the trees for the forest. You see the forest, but you don't see the details. You have to try to spread over the whole world. Starting with all the government and the universe and the environment and all that, and in the end, you don't get any specific outcome. It's difficult in the other direction. It's unbalanced. But still, the majority of researchers is still reductionists, are still going with their specific projects, and hope there is more unity, more synergy.
Let's go back a little bit. Let's go back quite a bit back. You've written a book about longevity in the 20th century, which is, I'm sure, amazing to most listeners, that in the 20th century, people were thinking about longevity. We all think it's a new buzzword, but your book, A History of Life Extension in the 20th Century, deals with how scientists, thinkers, and activists in the 1900s try to understand aging and I guess also help people to live longer. I guess it's a book about how even then human beings try to beat aging and people believing that it is possible to maybe not stop aging, but slow it down a little bit. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So first of all, yes, absolutely. I wrote my book not as any, archival document or of some niche interest. I wrote it specifically to encourage modern research. As they say, history is written by the winners. So if we write a history, we actually raise the generation of winners. We're the winners. We're the people who promote the subject, and we have to see our roots. We have to see where we come from and what our basis is. So I think this book will continue to help also the current generation of researchers, simply to show them the legitimacy of the subject. Yes, as you said, yes, people thought about it. They are not crazy. They didn't fell off the moon. There's a long history. The title of the book is in the 20th century, but it actually traces the history to the Egyptians and Ayurveda. You'll find it all there. In the alchemists, you'll find all this tradition there. But the main idea is really to show that, I guess, important work was done and serious people worked on this, so it will increase the legitimacy. There are also all kinds of other lessons that can be learned. Yes, it is in the history of human endeavor, of human attempts. Most of these people died trying. And it is also a history of unfulfilled promises, of broken dreams, of dead ideas. As you know, the term Death Valley. So if you look at my book, you'll see in the Death Valley full of bones of promising research directions that didn't yield any outcomes. So you'll be surprised to find many things that are hyped now You'll find it in the already known in the beginning of the 20th century, like the microbiome, right? A big hype, the transplantation of microbiome. And microbiome, Elie Meshnikov, the founder of gerontology, in the beginning of the 20th century, talked about all that, about the microbiome, the importance of intestinal putrefaction, and it just suggested a few ways to combat it, including the transplantation of microbiome. It was all there, still didn't work, and still we're returning to this. So there's a huge death valley, there's a huge gap between ideas and their implementations. The subject is difficult to work through. The subject of aging, it's an immensely complex, difficult subject. Some people try to reduce it to a few pathways, to a few hallmarks. No, it's a very complex subject. It's why most of the things didn't work, but it shows that the people did try and there were great ideas, but it was still upon us to actually bring it to practice to benefit from them.
You mentioned the microbiome. When you study the history of longevity, what patterns or ideas keep on repeating?
First of all, the idea of rejuvenation is definitely not a new idea. You said some people are surprised that the people thought about rejuvenation in the 20th century. They thought about it in the 19th century, the 16th century. So it's obvious. If you go to sleep, you get up rejuvenated. You go to sleep tired and you get up rejuvenated. So idea is in there that you can actually renew your youth. And all kinds of approaches were tried, including cell transplantation. Actually, the famous cell therapies, we now called regenerative medicine, they all started at least at the beginning of the 20th century. When cells were transplanted and organs were transplanted for rejuvenation, the pieces of tissue, testicular tissue in particular, that all started at least in the 20th century, but they were present even in the 19th century. So this idea of replacement therapy, hormone replacement therapy, tissue replacement therapy, all started at least 100 years back. So the ideas are solid ideas, but the devil's in the details. How to avoid the rejection, how to actually make those treatments work. So it's a complex scientific issue. People think that that we'll have the pill tomorrow. No, we'll still have to understand a lot. So that's basically the pattern, that we have the great scientific ideas with great rationale, like the microbiome, like the replacement therapy, hormone replacement therapy. They all had great rationales, but many of them were shattered by details, by technical difficulties, by human factors. So, once again, we have to learn and we have to understand, yes, the rationale is there, the feasibility is there, but it will be a long way until we actually reach results.
What do you think in today's sort of longevity movement is most misunderstood about its own history?
Similar with the main problem with the longevity, that's not recognized enough. And many people still think we have a history. And even you said, how come, people in the 20th century thought about longevity? They thought about it in the Egyptian times. You'll be surprised to read some Egyptian manuscript. I can read Egyptians, but the translation. So the people talked about aging being the main cause of diseases, and they talk about rejuvenation and growing your hair and renewing your skin. Where the term snake oil comes from? It comes from the Egyptians. Where the Egyptians used the fat of snakes to rejuvenate. Yes, people thought about it, but many people now think that this history simply doesn't exist. That the research, the longevity research, starts with the PubMed, with the latest publication of PubMed. No, it starts much earlier, and there's excellent ideas, a trove of treasures that can be found in history that may actually save some time for many modern researchers. We can look at it was already done, and some of the bottlenecks that could be identified. So history is very important, but the main problem with understanding history is to know that there's history. Read my book, get more interested in history. And many people don't have time for this. Once again, everybody's trying to start from scratch and from the latest search on PubMed. And I would say in AI, you don't even have to think about anything. You just do the ask ChatGPT, what about this or that, and get the answer. No, you have to study history. It's important.
So are there old arguments or mistakes that the current field is repeating without realizing it?
I wouldn't say it's mistakes, but the general pattern do recur. There are some, for example, in my book, in other papers, I identify a constant tug of war between reductionism and holism. As I mentioned, there is the drawbacks in reductionism. from drawbacks in holism, and people seem to switch, like a pendulum from this to that direction. One lesson you could learn is at least, try to get some balance between reductionism and holism. Otherwise, you either see the forest and don't see the trees, or you see the trees and don't see the forest. And the edging research has been swinging, that way for 100 years at least. So that's one. Also, try to be modest. Every time and again, we see the huge promises. Yeah, the solution for aging is just around the corner. We have such a great theory, such a great rationale. All the evidence is there. In 5 years, we get the pill, and we'll live forever. No, but it's much more complex. And every time that some such hope gets shattered, people lose motivation. No, we have to understand that it's a stepwise, incremental process. Some ideas get discarded, we get new ideas, so the work in progress. So yes, and another lesson probably, we should be aware of charlatans and of unjustified claims. For some periods, anti-aging as such was discarded. You say you're involved in anti-aging, okay, we have a stamp as a charlatan, goodbye. That's why also one of the reasons aging wasn't adopted in universities as a part of mainstream science. Now, in the last 20, 25 years, I would say that we are overcome the stigma. But still, if you say anti-aging, still it's stigmatized. And still many people, many practitioners still practice, unjustified claims and promises.
When you look into the future, where do you see the longevity field heading in 5 to 10 years? And what would real success for the longevity advocacy movement look like in, let's say, 2030?
Right. So some people believe by 2030 we'll achieve immortality. You can read some some authors 2030 immortality, but then you ask them, what does it actually mean? How will you prove in 2030 that you reach immortality? How can you be sure that you or somebody else will live for 100 years? People have to ask those basic questions. What is our evidence when you go to a longevity clinic, for example? What is our evidence that some treatment will extend your life? How can you prove it? You cannot live for 50 years and say, I took the treatment and somebody else in my age group took a placebo. I'm alive, he's dead, good for me. The longevity treatment work. No, we have to develop real scientific criteria for efficacy, real predictive models. All these are very difficult questions. If we begin to start solving them by 2030, I'll be happy. If we really come to some evidence-based criteria for effectiveness of treatment, I've been advocating for this for 10 years. My paper on the methodology of intervention to aging, I said exactly this. We don't know how to evaluate the effectiveness of anti-aging treatment. This biomarker and that biomarker, but what's the actual proof that this treatment will extend your life or healthy life? So if we come to some basic understanding is a consensus or pure based on science-based evaluation of aging and intervention, that will be a huge step forward, but I see could happen by 2030. And another thing is real public involvement. And no comparison, what is happening now, the level of awareness about aging and longevity, now no comparison to what it was 25 years ago. And now by 2030, I hope everybody becomes convinced. That's an important issue, that aging is our main health challenge for every country in the world, developed world, the developing world, for everybody. So that's our main target. That's what we have to solve. I think that could happen to 2030. So right now, I would estimate about 5% of the world begin to get it, begin to be involved in longevity, get interested. I hope the whole world becomes interested. Like they're interested now in health. Everybody now wants to be healthy. But if you ask people, do you want to live long? That's a question. Maybe until 95, but not until 100. God forbid 120. Judaism will still say until 120. I say 120 at least. Okay, thanks. So I'll try 120, and then I'll go on. So we should really set the longevity and health longevity as a global priority. I think it could happen in 2030. Of course, there are all kinds of obstacles on this purpose. Of course, it's not easy to work on longevity when there is war around, and I just came from a rocket shelter. So still, even now during the war, we try to promote the subject. Actually, published opinion piece. Even during the war, you have to continue working for longevity. But that's just me and people like me. We need the whole world to recognize the importance of the subject, to work for it. to compete for it in solutions, also to cooperate, both competition and cooperation. And I believe when people really, the role sets is a priority, then there will be no wars. Because obviously, if you want to live longer, you want to go to war. I think if longevity movement wins, becomes a real global priority, then we'll be on the right way to achieve castle and journey.
And where do you think the longevity movement is still underestimating what it will take to become mainstream public policy?
When will we see the therapies? First, I'm Jewish, so I answer with a question. First, what does mean therapy? We don't know how to evaluate the effectiveness of the therapy. And then I say it only depends on us. And if the governments become convinced, then they'll start investing, then they will start developing the policies, then we'll start developing the treatments, then we'll start implementing the treatments, then we'll start relating the treatments. In short, it's a long way off. And the sooner we start, the sooner we finish. So it all depends on us. If health longevity becomes a global priority, we'll get there sooner, maybe in 10, 15, 20 years. If nobody is interested, if people are interested about wars, we want to get there even in 50 years.
Very true. Very true. Thank you so much, Dr. Ilia. We could go on for a long time. You're just so insightful. I always finish with asking my guests 5 rapid-fire questions. What's the single best piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Wow, that's a tough one. Actually, if I started later, I would tell him to get involved in longevity research and advocacy. But as I was interested since I was 6 years old, I guess nothing to advise. I get my life correctly.
You were ahead of the game. Name 1 habit everyone should adopt for a longer, healthier life.
1 habit out of 4. We have just 4 habits that we know and they can actually extend your longevity. That's a good rest and sleep, physical exercise, moderate and balanced nutrition, and motivation. And out of those 4, I would say motivation. If you have motivation, you'll sleep healthily and eat right and exercise. If you don't have motivation, you will have a reason to live, and all the other things will not work.
Okay, now this is a tough question for you. If you weren't in longevity science, what career would you have chosen?
I can't imagine, actually. I can't imagine. No, really. I had this idefix, as I said, from 6 years of age, and I can't imagine anything else. I could have been forced. What I can tell you, I could have been forced to another career path. That's for sure. I have an amazing English teacher. I could have become an English teacher. I could have become clerk. So I could do all kinds of things. But in terms of the vocation or something I want to do, I wouldn't think about anything else.
Yeah, I told you that was a tough question for you. What microdose habit, a 5-minute routine, or small daily action yields outsized longevity benefits?
Once again, out of the 4 things that we know can help for longevity, I would still think that education is the most important. Get inquired, get motivated, get interested, get others interested. I think 5 minutes to get yourself up to date in the field will help a lot.
What's the craziest longevity myth you've encountered? And is there any truth to it?
The craziest longevity myth that we're just around the corner toward living forever. Because we've been saying this for the past 3,000 years, and the corner is getting further and further away. So that's that.
So you don't think there's any truth to it?
Oh, well, that's a myth you just want to believe. That you just want to believe. It's so nice. And I say, okay, you got me. Okay, let's get the public, let's get the advocates with hammers that break this corner, and they get through the corner. So the sooner we break the corner, the sooner we get through it, over it.
Okay, well, listen, thank you so much for coming on Beyond Longevity. It was a pleasure talking to you. Such an insightful conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
That was Dr. Ilia Stambler on the policy and advocacy side of longevity and on the work required to make this field matter beyond its own supporters. If healthier, longer lives are ever to become a real priority, it will not happen through science alone. It will take advocacy, coalition building, public funding, and governments willing to turn longevity from an interesting idea into actual policies. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Beyond Longevity. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow, subscribe, and share it with anyone interested in longevity, public policy, and the future of healthier, longer lives.